What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In the last video, I was able to get the transmission out of the Evo. Since I was upgrading the turbo, I already had it out. I figured I might as well replace the clutch too. This thing does have the factory clutch in it, and it has 64,000 miles on it. With the upgraded turbo and bolt-ons, it should make some decent power, and I want it to be able to hold that power for a little while. For this video, I will be getting the new ACT clutch and flywheel installed, and then I will be getting the transmission reinstalled. Stay tuned. If you didn't see the last video, here is the transmission. I went through pretty much everything you need to take off to remove it. Here is the factory clutch down here. And then over here we have the new ACT clutch and flywheel. I decided to go ahead and upgrade the flywheel too. It's not the Pro Light, it is the Streetlite. The Pro Light is just a little bit lighter than this one. I still want to keep this thing streetable. I don't want it to be too harsh when I drive it. I also went with the heavy duty pressure plate, and then it's the sprung clutch disc. This thing is supposed to be rated for at least 510 foot-pounds. The Evo is still a stock block, so the bottom end should not even hold near close to that. Along with the clutch disc, it comes with the clutch alignment tool, some grease for the splines. It also comes with a new throwout bearing. Underneath is the heavy duty pressure plate, and it comes with the monolock collar already in there. Before I install the clutch and flywheel though, I do want to clean up the transmission and get the new throwout bearing and all of that installed. I'll get the old throwout bearing taken out, I'll get all of this cleaned up really good, and then I'll get the new one reinstalled. New throwout bearing is installed, pretty easy process. I took this out up top thinking I was gonna have to go through there to punch this out, but I actually could just push it with my finger. You do have to use a little punch or an extension to knock this piece out. Remove this 10mm bolt. You have these springs right here that you have to remove. A pair of needle nose pliers works really easy and well for that. After that, this little pin just slides right out of there. Remove the fork, and then the throwout bearing can come out. I went ahead and used some of the ACT grease that they give you over here for this piece. I wanted to make sure that I had enough for the actual splines over here and then on the disc. For everything else, I just used this Redline CV2. Now that the new throwout bearing is on, I want to go ahead and get the flywheel and clutch disc actually installed. But before I can do that, I've got to remove the OEM one. It's 6 bolts holding the pressure plate on, and then I believe 6 or 7 bolts holding the flywheel on. New ACT clutch and flywheel are fully installed. It was not without trouble. My original plan was to reuse the old flywheel bolt. There's nothing wrong with it, just a little blue Loctite and they would have been just fine. However, having an impact is great. It definitely makes life a lot easier, but if you're not careful, you can definitely make some mistakes. This thing slipped off of this one twice on me and it really started to round the edges. I was actually getting really nervous. I didn't know what I was going to do to get this thing out of there. A quick Google search and I figured out that good old Harbor Freight had a set of bolt extractors. I've never used these before, so I was kind of skeptical. They were fairly expensive. Even for Harbor Freight, a 9-piece metric set was still 35 bucks. But it was absolutely worth it. It worked perfectly. It hooked on there and pulled that bolt right out. The really unfortunate part is, since I planned on reusing the OEM flywheel bolts, I was one bolt short, so I had to reorder one. I figured since I was already replacing one, I might as well replace them all. New flywheel bolts came in the mail today, so I went ahead and got them on. I am on my own today, so I had to figure out a way to hold the crank from the other side. I've just got 2 zip ties on either one of these little clip holes. It holds this in, makes sure that it doesn't back out any. And then I've got 1 zip tie on the subframe here so that it holds this down. Flywheel bolts get torqued down to 30 foot-pounds first, so I used this one. I did not have a torque wrench big enough to go up to 96 foot-pounds, which is what the second round calls for. These digital ones at Harbor Freight are actually about 180 bucks. After taxes, you're looking at about 200. As always, I'm always searching on Marketplace, and I was able to get a really good deal on this. I picked it up for 100 bucks, brand spanking new, from some lady who bought it and never used it. Like I said, first pass is 30 foot-pounds, and then the second pass is 96 foot-pounds. These clutch kits do come from the factory with oil on them to keep the metal from rusting. I cleaned all of the surfaces up with this brake clean to get the oil off. The main part you want to hit is where the clutch actually touches the pressure plate and the flywheel. After that, I just used some of the grease that they give you to put on the splines where the transmission goes into the clutch. Just kind of rub it all in there and then put the actual clutch disc on there. After the clutch disc has grease on it, you can just put your clutch alignment tool in. It should hold it in there temporarily. I did struggle with the pressure plate a little bit. You just kind of have to make sure that it's all lined up. These get tightened down to 24 foot-pounds, and I did do these also in a star pattern. After that, you pull the clutch alignment tool out and it is finished. Now that the flywheel and clutch are fully installed, it's time for the transmission to go back in. I will not be doing that by myself today. Travis and Cody, who also helped me pull this thing out of here, will be coming back over this weekend to help me put it back in. I will catch back up with you guys a little bit later on, get this transmission reinstalled. I'll go ahead and get the slave cylinder back on so I can test out how this clutch feels. Transmission is back in the Evo. It's been a couple of days since I actually got it back in there. Even with a couple of friends helping me, it did take all afternoon to get this in. I wanted to take my time. I definitely didn't want to tear anything up putting this thing back in. We had to do quite a bit of maneuvering and a little bit of MacGyvering to get this to fit in properly. Having 3 heads instead of 1 to think about everything definitely made it easier, not to mention having 3 sets of hands. Again, Cody and Travis, I truly appreciate your help. First thing that we did, obviously, is just roll the transmission back underneath there, jack it up as high as you can until it starts to touch something. I did not take off any of the front parts here. The front bumper is still on there, the front intercooler piping is still on there, and all of the radiator hoses are on there. The first problem that I encountered was it kept hitting the radiator hose down there at the very very bottom. And if I tried to push it back any further, the motor mount would hit on the subframe. Once we got to that point, what I started to do is drop the jack down that was holding the motor in. It actually lowered the motor a little bit. It gives you just a little bit of room to move the transmission in, and then you can start to jack it up just a little bit higher. The biggest issue that I had is because the car is jacked up in the front, the motor tends to want to lean towards the back. Every time I would jack it up or lower it, it kept wanting to stay in the back. It would never come forward. That's where the MacGyvering came into play. We just used a ratchet tie down. There's a couple of bare areas right here where I would attach the hook. And then on my work van back here, I've got this hook on the back of the leaf spring. We just used the ratchet to pull the motor forward. That actually made a world of difference. It was also sitting back there on the transfer case. From there, it was just a matter of lowering the motor up and down and then moving the transmission up and down and wiggling it in. Eventually, you'll get to a point where the motor will just be angled down just a little bit. You can have the transmission up just high enough and it will be mated up at the bottom. We used a couple of carabiners and chains and just attached them to the transmission mount right here. Cody and Travis were up top holding the chains and they were actually able to take a lot of weight off of that transmission. If you're a big boy, this may not work, but I was able to fit in here and actually grab the bottom of the transmission while it was sitting on the jack. While they were lifting it up, I was lifting from the bottom down here. Like I said before, when you're doing this, the motor is actually at an angle, so all of this is still dropped down. Just line your bolt holes up and then just kind of wiggle the transmission back and forth, and eventually those splines will go in. I just put one bolt in up top and then I put one in on the bottom. Everything else is pretty simple. I just started attaching the motor mounts. So I've got the side mount on here. You just lift it up and then you can just match up where the nuts go on. I did put this mount over here, the one that actually attaches to the transmission, on before I raised it up. That back bolt that's back here is really hard to get to if it's all the way up. And then the last thing that I did is I went ahead and reattached the mount on the subframe back there. I do want to test it out. I have not tested it out yet, so I've already locked in the monolock collar. I go ahead and reattach the slave cylinder right here, and I can see how this clutch feels. I really hope this clutch holds as much torque as it says it can, because this thing feels even lighter than the factory clutch in my opinion. Everything definitely feels smooth. There's nothing that feels wrong. Now that I know the clutch is all good, it's time to start just putting everything back together. I'm going to start with getting all of the bolts back in that connect the engine to the transmission. I want to get the transfer case reconnected and get all of those bolts in. And the last thing I want to do is get the subframe lifted back up and reconnected. Transmission is fully reconnected and all the bolts are torqued down to spec. All of the bolts connecting the transmission to the engine get torqued down to 38 foot-pounds. I also got the transfer case reconnected. When I was actually doing it, I was using my feet to actually push the engine forward so that I could get it to line up. Afterwards, when I was actually trying to put the bolts in, I realized that you could just push the drive shaft up in the back. It helps to line everything up a little bit better. I searched online, but I could not get a definitive answer on how far to torque these things down. One forum I read about these getting torqued down to 30, and then they said these get torqued down to 50. I could not find the service manual for the transfer case. I did find the one for this one. That's how I knew these were 38. I just went ahead and torqued these down to 38 also. They're definitely nice and snug. I don't think I'll have any issues. I'll definitely come back later on after putting some miles on this thing and recheck all of these bolts anyway. The last thing that I did is I got the subframe up and reattached, and then I got all of the bracing and the transmission mounts reattached. I'm not going to be putting the wheel hub assembly and the axles back in this video. If you followed the channel at all, a while back I had to replace the inner CD boot axle clamps. They were all leaking from right here, the back ones too. Before I put these back in, I'm going to replace these outer clamps, and then I'm going to put some more grease on the inside. I'll be saving that for the next video. I also haven't reconnected anything up top yet. I plan on leaving all of this disconnected until I get the new turbo and the manifold back in. It'll make it a lot easier having all of this stuff out of the way. My plan for the next video is to get all of this done, get all of that back together. I am dying to get this new turbo in the car. I may not be able to get everything fully installed, but I'm at least going to try to get all of the lines transferred over to the new turbo. Super stoked though, having the clutch in there now, having the transmission back on. I feel like I'm definitely on the downhill slope to getting this new turbo in there and getting this thing retuned. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, definitely hit that like button. If you want to see more going on with the Evo and the new turbo going in, hit that subscribe button, and I will catch you guys next time.